In 2024, MiHoYo, the studio behind popular gacha franchises like Genshin Impact and Honkai Star Rail, earned $4.7 billion. That's more than Roblox at $3.6 billion and only $1.3 billion less than Epic Games, the company behind Fortnite and the Epic Games Store, which made $6 billion. If you're like me, you might be wondering, how can a studio that makes anime-style open-world games compete with a giant like Epic Games? The answer is one word: gacha. Most of MiHoYo's revenue comes from gacha systems. For those who don't know what that is, gacha comes from the word gachapon, a type of Japanese vending machine that dispenses random collectible toys in capsules. In games, it refers to a system where players spend in-game currency to receive a random character, weapon, or item. Similar to a slot machine, each pull brings a rush of anticipation, excitement, and uncertainty in the hope of landing something rare. People love gacha for the same reason they love collecting cards or opening mystery packs. There's a rush of anticipation every time you pull, the thrill of chasing something rare, and the satisfaction of finally getting that one character you wanted. Gacha games also mix this feeling with emotional attachment, storytelling, and beautiful design, turning every pull into more than a transaction. It becomes a part of the experience. If this sounds familiar, that's because gacha games use the same psychological tricks that casinos rely on to keep people playing. Both gacha systems and slot machines are built around variable rewards, a concept in behavioral psychology where players are rewarded at unpredictable intervals. This unpredictability triggers the brain's release of dopamine, the chemical associated with pleasure and motivation. Every pull brings a moment of hope, a small gamble where the next click might deliver something incredible. Even when players lose, the memory of past wins and the promise of the next one keeps them coming back. The bright visuals, dramatic animations, and celebratory sounds that accompany rare pulls amplify the excitement, making the entire process feel rewarding even when it's not. But the interesting thing is that the mechanism gacha games and casinos use to attract players is built on the same core principle: randomness, or more accurately, pseudo-randomness. Both games and casinos rely on random number generators, RNGs, to simulate chance-based outcomes. In gacha systems and loot boxes, these algorithms determine what rewards players receive, creating an illusion of luck. Each pull or loot box opening produces a result that feels random, often with specific probabilities attached to different rarity levels. This design is intentional. The unpredictability keeps players engaged because every roll carries a possibility, however small, of winning something extraordinary. The brain reacts to that uncertainty with small bursts of excitement and anticipation, the same emotional high that slot machines are built to trigger. It's this blend of randomness and hope that makes players say, maybe the next one will be it, fueling both the fun and the danger behind these systems. You might be wondering to yourself, what's the difference between randomness and pseudo-randomness? In simple terms, randomness means every possible outcome has an equal and unpredictable chance of happening. For example, when you flip a coin or roll a dice, you cannot know the results ahead of time. Computers, however, cannot create true randomness because they follow exact instructions. They don't know how to roll dice or flip coins. Instead, they use something called a pseudo-random number generator, or RNG, a type of algorithm that produces a long sequence of numbers that look random. These generators start from a starting point called a seed, often something like the current time. If you use the same seed again, the computer will produce the same random results again, which means it's not truly random, just pretending to be. True randomness comes from nature, from unpredictable events like radioactive decay, atmospheric noise, or quantum activity, things that no one can predict or repeat exactly. We'll talk about how this works later, but for now, all you need to know is that true randomness comes from nature and has no pattern. Pseudo-randomness is generated by computers and only appears to be random. In regulated casinos, electronic slot machines also use RNGs to decide the outcome of each spin. The results are not manually rigged. Instead, the casino keeps its advantage by controlling the probabilities behind the scenes, which maintains the house edge, while still making every spin feel random. In a legitimate casino, a roulette spin or slot pull is genuinely random within the designed odds. But even when everything is fair, player psychology has a powerful effect. Long streaks of bad luck can make players believe the system is cheating, leading to the same kind of conspiracy theories seen in gacha communities. A famous example of this is what happened in the mobile game Grand Blue Fantasy. During what fans call Monkeygate, one player reportedly spent more than $6,000 trying to unlock a rare character. The backlash was so strong that it pushed developers to introduce new rules requiring games to publish their drop rates publicly. To address similar concerns, many modern gacha games now include a pity system. These systems guarantee that after a certain number of failed attempts, the player will receive a rare item or character. This helps to smooth out extreme bad luck and keeps players from becoming too frustrated, while still keeping the thrill of chance alive. Even with all these systems in place, the truth is that computer-based randomness is never truly random. Beneath the surface, every digital RNG is deterministic, meaning it follows a strict set of rules defined by the game's code. As one developer explained, the cold hard truth is that every RNG in your game is already predetermined. Unless you're playing a physical game in real life, then it's actually luck. In other words, if a computer starts with the same initial state or the same seed, it will always produce the exact same sequence of quote-unquote random results. What this means is that you cannot influence your luck in a fair digital system, no matter how you time your clicks or what rituals you follow. Still, many players believe that certain habits improve their odds, like pulling right after someone else gets a rare item or waiting for a special animation. These are superstitions, not science, unless the game's developers intentionally coded their system to react with those inputs. As we touched upon earlier, in most cases, the PRNG uses something like the current time or server-generated seed to create a random number. Let's say, for example, the number is between 1 and 100. If that number lands on 99 or 100, you get a rare reward. Because this calculation happens in microseconds, it feels completely unpredictable to us, even though the computer's logic is fixed. To show what I mean, I built a small program that simulates random number generation, similar to the type you would see in a Gacha game. This program is pretty simple and straightforward, but I think it illustrates the point well, so let's break it down. The first thing we do is pick a specific date and time for our seed, similar to how random number generators often use a date and time for their seed. The next thing we do is create 2 separate random number generators using that seed, and then we loop 100 times to get 100 different random numbers for each generator. Then we compare each value generated by each generator to see if they are the same, and finally we just output the results. We can see here that despite using 2 different random number generators, the results are the same when we start with the same seed. Let's add a different random number generator, not using that initial seed. Here we're going to leave the parameters empty, signifying that the constructor should use a random seed. And the results? We can see here that when the same seed is not being used, the results are different, proving that computers don't use randomness, but instead it's predetermined and calculated based off the seed. This is what makes digital randomness so interesting. It looks unpredictable, but underneath is completely repeatable and controlled. What feels like luck is really just math pretending to be chance. Humans are remarkably adept at pattern recognition, a skill that helped our ancestors survive. It allowed them to spot predators, identify safe foods, and predict changes in the environment long before modern tools existed. But this same skill can work against us when we face randomness. Our minds crave order and meaning, so we often see patterns or streaks where none actually exist. Physicist Richard Feynman once joked, "You won't believe what happened to me today. Nothing." This quote captures the problem perfectly. When something truly random happens, our brains struggle to accept it. We look for reasons, rhythms, or hidden causes in events that are purely chance. One well-known example of this is the gambler's fallacy, the belief that past outcomes somehow influence future ones, even in completely independent events. A gambler might see a roulette wheel land on black 5 times in a row and confidently bet on red, believing that a red result is due in order to balance things out. In truth, the odds remain the same on every spin. As Professor Richard Muller explains, the fall of the ball on the roulette wheel really is random. The fact that the last 5 balls were black doesn't mean the next one will be black too, nor does a string of black balls mean the next one will be red. It doesn't have to even out in the short term. Every spin, roll, or pull is independent, yet our intuition imagines invisible forces restoring balance. Another common illusion is our tendency to see streaks or clusters in random sequences. If you flip a coin 10 times and get 5 heads in a row, it feels suspiciously unlikely. But in true randomness, streaks like that happen all the time. Psychologists Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman observed that people systematically misperceive randomness. We see patterns where there are none. Our mental model of randomness is flawed. We expect random results to alternate evenly, but in reality, randomness often produces clumps or runs. The same is true visually. If you scatter 100 points completely at random, you will naturally see clusters and empty spaces. If you instead space the points out evenly, it may look more random, but it's actually less random because it was designed to avoid clustering. This mismatch between how randomness really behaves and how we think it should behave lies at the heart of many illusions in gaming and gambling alike. Our pattern-seeking brains crave order, even when the universe or the code offers none. Our pattern-seeking nature also leads to apophenia, the tendency to see connections or meaning where none exists. We see faces in clouds, believe in lucky lottery numbers, or think a coincidence must be fate. This same mental wiring affects how we remember and interpret random events. Gamblers, for example, tend to remember their big wins and hot streaks far more than their losses. which reinforces the idea that they have skill or intuition. This connects to a broader cognitive bias, known as the illusion of control, the belief that we can influence outcomes that are purely random. In gambling, people blow on dice, pick lucky slot machines, or choose their own lottery numbers because these small rituals make them feel in control. Psychologist Ellen Langer famously demonstrated this effect in experiments where participants who selected their own lottery numbers value their tickets more highly than those who are given random numbers. Even though both sides have the same odds of winning, people believe their personal choice gave them an advantage. Later studies showed that when participants were told their control was imaginary, their confidence levels remained the same as those who actually had control. This reveals how easily we can internalize a sense of agency, even in situations governed entirely by chance. These illusions are part of a broader set of positive biases that keep gamblers coming back. Losing feels temporary, while winning feels like proof that skill or fate is on your side. Our discomfort with true randomness even extends into technology. When Apple released the first iPod Shuffle, users complained that it wasn't random because songs by the same artist would sometimes play back to back. As Steve Jobs later explained, it really is random, but sometimes random means you get 2 songs from the same artist in a row. In response, Apple actually made the algorithm less random so it felt more random to users. This example captures the heart of the issue. True randomness often feels wrong to us. As psychologist Amos Tversky once said, people see patterns where there are none, and they can invent causes to explain them. We're so comfortable with the idea of pure chance that we instinctively assign meaning, agency, or intent to random events, convincing ourselves that luck, skill, or destiny must somehow be involved. And finally, random rewards have a powerful effect on human behavior through a process psychologists call variable ratio reinforcement. This is the same mechanism that drives gambling addiction. When rewards are unpredictable, they trigger surges of dopamine, the brain's pleasure chemical, creating excitement and reinforcing the habit. In fact, studies have shown that a near miss, or almost winning, can produce nearly the same dopamine response as a real win. This keeps players chasing that next one, believing that success is just around the corner. The irregular and unpredictable nature of these rewards, and that feeling of you never know when the next big win is coming, creates a feedback loop that can become compulsive. This is exactly why slot machines and gacha games are so captivating. Both use the same psychological structure: frequent small losses, occasional wins, and a constant sense of almost getting there. Each pull or spin keeps players emotionally invested, hoping that the next one will finally pay off. As researchers have noted, slot machine payouts aren't designed to be purely random. They're made to be addictive. Those small, unpredictable dopamine spikes are what keep players coming back again and again. In short, our own psychology is what gives randomness its power. The gambler's fallacy, our tendency to see patterns, the illusion of control, and the pull of reinforcement conditioning all work together to make chance feel meaningful. The universe may operate on probability, but we experience it through emotion, memory, and hope, always searching for reason in randomness. We now know why randomness is so valuable and why it has such a powerful effect on us. But how do computers actually do randomness? Like we saw in our earlier code example, they mostly fake it. A typical computer simply cannot pull a random number out of thin air. Instead, they rely on the RNG. This algorithm produces a sequence of numbers that look random but already have been shown to be influenced by the starting seed. RNGs have been around for decades and come in many forms, but one of the oldest and simplest is a linear congruential generator, or LCG. The LCG is a classic example used in early computers and even some modern applications where high-level randomness is not critical. It works using a simple mathematical reoccurrence formula. The xn is the current random number, or seed. A is the multiplier, which scales with the previous value. C is the increment, which shifts the value by a constant amount, and m is the modulus, which limits the range of possible numbers. Each time the formula runs, it produces a new number in the sequence. If you start with the same seed, you'll always get the same sequence again, making it predictable and not truly random. LCGs are simple and fast, but they have serious limitations. They are periodic, meaning that after a certain number of outputs, the sequence begins to repeat. In the worst case, the period can be very short, especially if the parameters were chosen poorly. Bad configurations can even create visible patterns, which can be exploited by bad actors. The PRNG is periodic because every PRNG has a period, a point where the sequence starts repeating. Because the math operates in a finite range, limited by the modulus, the generator can only produce a certain number of unique values before it starts to cycle back to the beginning. Here's a simple demonstration in C#. This version tracks the numbers produced and detects when the sequence begins to loop back to its starting point. Let's break the code down first. To begin, we set our three variables representing the multiplier, increment, and modulus. Next, we set our seed, then we set x, or the random value, equal to the seed for the first run. Next, we create a hash set to hold the values that we've seen already. The reason we're using this instead of a list is because hash set has only unique values, so we can only have the one value, and this can help us know if the values are repeated. Next, we create a boolean to tell us if we've seen a repeated value as well. This will be used to control the loop and tell us to end after we've seen the value. And finally, we just keep track of the number of items in the sequence. In our loop, we're going to be using that repeated boolean as a flag to let us know if the value has been repeated. The first thing we're going to be doing in our loop is to check if the current x value or the random number is in our list of seen values. If it's not, we're going to add it and then do some mathematics that I showed earlier in order to get the next pseudo-random number. We're also going to increment the count. Once we find a number that's already been seen, we're going to go to that else statement, set repeated to true, and output what that number is. And then now, since that repeated flag has been set to true, our loop will end and the program will also end. If we look at the results, we can see that after a period of only 16 numbers, the loop repeats and the number 7 is present again. If you increase the modulus or change the parameters, you'll get very different periods. Some combinations have very short cycles, like the one we just saw, while others can produce millions of numbers before repeating. But no matter how large the modulus is, the sequence will always eventually repeat. A notorious example of this issue was the Randu algorithm from the 1960s. It used flawed parameters that caused strong correlations between generated values, producing diagonal patterns in simulations, making it unsuitable for real scientific work. Later, improved versions like the Park-Miller Minimal Standard LCG fixed many of these issues by using mathematically sound parameters, giving sequences with the longest possible periods. Still, no matter how well designed an LCG is, it will always be deterministic. If someone knows the algorithm and the seed, they can produce the entire sequence exactly. As one researcher put it, the random numbers we generate are not random at all, they are perfectly deterministic. If we know the algorithm and the seed, we know in advance what will be generated. Technically, the answer is no, we're not producing randomness. Early computer scientists understood these challenges well. John von Neumann, one of the pioneers in modern computing, warned against relying too heavily on mathematical shortcuts for randomness. He famously said, "Anyone who considers arithmetical methods for producing random digits is, of course, in a state of sin." Years later, Donald Knuth, the legendary author of The Art of Computer Programming, echoed the warning with humor. Random numbers cannot be generated with a method chosen at random. Both were emphasizing the same truth. You must carefully design and test your random number generators. You cannot simply improvise and expect genuine randomness. Despite their limitations, LCGs were game-changing for their time. They allowed early computers to simulate randomness efficiently for games, simulations, and basic research. However, because of their predictability and repeating patterns, they were not suitable for high-secure or high-stakes systems. Modern computers now use far more sophisticated techniques, which draw upon entropy and unpredictable physical processes such as hardware noise, timing variations, or user input. But the goal remains the same: to make deterministic machines behave as if they were unpredictable. Over time, computer scientists developed far more sophisticated random number generators. One of the most influential is the Mersenne twister, created by Makoto Matsumoto and Takuji Nishimura in 1997. It quickly became the default PRNG in many major programming languages and applications, including Python, R, and Microsoft Excel. The Mersenne twister is famous for its extremely long period of 2 to the power of 19,937 minus 1. It also had excellent mathematical properties, making it ideal for simulations, modeling, and general-purpose use. After the Mersenne twister came algorithms like Zorshift, Pre-Mutated Congruential Generator, or PCG, and other modern designs that aim to balance speed, period length, and statistical quality. However, all these generators share one fundamental limitation: they're all still algorithmic. This means that if someone can observe enough of their output or gain knowledge of their internal state, they can predict every future number the generator will produce. For instance, the Mersenne twist outputs 32-bit numbers. If an attacker can capture 624 consecutive outputs, they can reconstruct the entire internal state and predict every subsequent number. This is perfectly fine for games, data sampling, or simulations, but is unacceptable for something like cryptography. This limitation led to the creation of cryptographically secure pseudo-random number generators, or CSP-RNGs. These algorithms are designed so that even if someone sees many outputs, they still cannot determine the generator's internal state or even predict future values. CSPRNGs use strong cryptographic primitives such as block ciphers or hash functions to thoroughly scramble their internal data. One early example is Blum Blum Shrub from 1986, a mathematically elegant but slow generator based on quadratic residues in modular arithmetic. Modern systems use standardized designs which rely on AES and SHA-256 internally to produce random secure streams. Many operating systems have also integrated cryptographically secure randomness at the system level. For example, the Linux kernel uses an entropy pool combined with algorithms like Cha-Cha-20 to produce streams of random bytes. These are fast enough for most applications and secure enough for cryptographic use. In essence, CSPRNGs trade speed for unpredictability, ensuring that even if an attacker knows part of the output, they cannot infer the rest. As the cryptographer Bruce Schneier warns, random numbers are used everywhere in security, and a weakness in the RNG can undermine the whole system. That is why modern CSPRNGs are tested thoroughly to ensure that no feasible amount of observation can distinguish their output from true randomness or predict future results. Even the best algorithms, though, cannot produce true randomness because they are all still deterministic. To get genuine unpredictability, computers can use true random number generators, or TRNGs, which sample real-world physical processes. Many modern CPUs include built-in hardware RNGs, such as Intel's RDRAND and RDSeed instructions. They rely on thermal noise or electronic fluctuations. Other systems collect entropy from unpredictable events like user input timing, disk drive latency, or even quantum effects like radioactive decay or photon beam splitting. These sources provide true randomness, which can be used directly or to seed other PRNGs, combining the speed of algorithms with the unpredictability of nature. Random number generators have evolved from simple formulas like LCGs to highly complex cryptographic algorithms. But one truth remains: if you know the state or the seed, the sequence is completely determined. One writer puts it, computers are only capable of a certain kind of randomness because computers are finite devices. They cannot produce an infinite, truly random, aperiodic sequence on their own. They can only simulate it. We can judge the quality of a PRNG by how indistinguishable its results are from true randomness. For cryptographic purposes, we also test whether an adversary can feasibly guess or predict its output. If a PRNG passes these tests, we consider it random enough for practical use. But it's worth remembering John von Neumann's warning. Using deterministic methods to produce random numbers is a state of sin. It's a sin every computer must commit, but one that we manage carefully through mathematics, design, and rigorous testing. We've seen that PRNGs are deterministic at their core. Once you know the internal state, every random number they produce has already been decided. So, how do computers inject real uncertainty into something so unpredictable? The answer lies in the seed, a bridge between the rigid logic of machine and the chaos of the physical world. Every pseudo-random sequence begins with a seed. The simplest approach is to use time itself. But like we demonstrated earlier, if an attacker knows roughly when a program started, they can guess the seed within seconds. Netscape actually learned this the hard way in the mid-1990s. Their early SSL implementation used just 3 values for seeding: the time of day, process ID, and parent process ID. Researchers Ian Goldberg and David Wagner showed that those 3 numbers were enough to recover the seed, allowing them to reconstruct the encryption keys Netscape was using. The algorithms themselves were cryptographically sound, but the random seed feeding them wasn't. Netscape fixed this by gathering more entropy before seeding, but the lesson stuck. A PRNG is only as strong as the unpredictability of its seed. Modern operating systems learn from these failures. They maintain what's called an entropy pool, a rolling collection of noisy, hard-to-predict data. Each keystroke, mouse movement, disk seek, and network packet arrival adds a small amount of randomness. These unpredictable timing differences are continuously mixed together using cryptographic hash functions to form a constantly evolving state. Interfaces like Linux's dev-random and dev-urandom draw from this pool to seed CSPRNGs. The system then uses stream ciphers, such as Cha-Cha-20, to expand that entropy into long streams of pseudo-random bytes. When this process is disrupted, the consequences can be catastrophic. In 2006, a Debian developer removed a line of code from OpenSSL that had been reading uninitialized memory, unknowingly removing a vital source of entropy. This left the process ID as the only input to the seed. For nearly 2 years, keys generated on affected Debian and Ubuntu systems came from a set of only 32,768 possible values. Attackers could pre-compute every single one of those values. The fix was simple: restore proper entropy collection and advise everyone to regenerate their keys. but the incident showed how fragile randomness can be when handled casually. To strengthen seeding even further, modern CPUs include built-in hardware random number generators. Intel's RDRAN and RDSeed instructions draw entropy from electronic noise inside the chip, converting subtle thermal fluctuations into random bits. These hardware sources are fast and convenient, though not always trusted, especially in cryptographic contexts, where transparency matters. Some cloud providers and security modules therefore use dedicated hardware RNGs built from physical processes like noise diodes, photon beam splitting, and even radioactive decay. One of the most creative examples of real-world entropy comes from Cloudflare's San Francisco lobby, where a wall of about 100 lava lamps is continuously filmed by camera. The moving blobs of wax, fluctuating lights, reflections, and even people walking by all feed into a live entropy stream. Each video frame, essentially millions of unpredictable pixel values, becomes raw material for randomness. The result is a high-dimensional signal that's impossible to reproduce exactly, providing a vivid reminder that even in the digital age, true randomness is ultimately born from physical chaos. Seeding injects genuine unpredictability into systems that would otherwise be perfectly deterministic. A good seed is both high entropy and unique, and long-running processes periodically reseed to stay unpredictable. Cryptographers often recommend gathering at least twice the target security level in bits of entropy. For example, 256 bits of true randomness for 128 bits of security. Randomness may seem like a small detail, but it's often the weakest link when ignored. Computers can't escape their deterministic nature, but through careful engineering, combining entropy pools, cryptography mixing, and even lava lamps, we teach them to imitate chaos well enough to keep our secret. At times, we have failed though to ensure a system has enough randomness, and this has shown us how predictable randomness can quietly compromise even the strongest cryptography. Let's take a look at some of these instances and see what we can learn. As mentioned earlier, Netscape's SSL implementation seeded its RNG using only the system time and process ID. Within hours of this vulnerability's disclosure, security researchers demonstrated they could crack SSL sessions simply by guessing the seed. The incident became one of the first public wake-up calls about the dangers of random enough assumptions. It forced browser developers and standard bodies to start demanding explicit entropy requirements in cryptographic systems. Randomness failures weren't just limited to cryptography though. In the 1990s, several TCP/IP stacks used weakened PRNGs to generate initial sequence numbers for network connections. Because these numbers were predictable, attackers could spoof packets or hijack sessions by guessing the next sequence number. The 1995 paper, Strike a Key While the Pin is Hot, showed how poor randomness in network protocols could enable full connection takeover. Modern networking standards now require cryptographically secure RNGs for sequence generation. Similar RNG weakness hit casinos and online poker sites. In 1999, a group of gamblers in Atlantic City cracked the PRNG of a video poker machine, an LCG with poor parameters, by recording a few hands and calculating the generator's internal state, letting them predict future deals. In 2012, an online poker site suffered a breach when a shuffling algorithm reused seeds, allowing a player to predict opponents' hold cards. In every case, the problem wasn't luck, it was math. Weak pseudo-randomness turned games of chance into solvable equations. One common thread through all these failures was that the randomness was either too predictable or reused when it shouldn't have been. In nearly every case, the fix was conceptually simple: use more entropy and use better algorithms. But those fixes only arrived after major losses or public scandals. As security expert Bruce Schneier once said, security flaws in random number generators are really easy to accidentally create and really hard to discover after the fact. Attackers love targeting RNGs because compromising one gives them an almost universal advantage. If you can predict the random numbers, you can predict everything built on top of them: keys, tokens, handshakes, and even secrets. Let's take a moment to step back and look at the bigger picture. Throughout this exploration, we've seen that in computers, random outcomes aren't truly random at all. They come from deterministic algorithms influenced by sources of entropy. This raises an age-old question though. In a deterministic universe, or even in a machine that follows precise rules, is randomness just an illusion? And if so, why do humans cling so strongly to the idea of luck? In classical physics, the universe is deterministic. If you knew the position and velocity of every particle as Laplace imagined, you could calculate the future in perfect detail. Nothing will be random, only incredibly complex. Randomness then would simply reflect our ignorance. As Nassim Nicholas Taleb put it, while in theory randomness is an intrinsic property, in practice randomness is incomplete information. What feels random to us often just hides causes we cannot measure. A slot machine spin feels unpredictable, but if you could track every mechanical vibration and every thermal fluctuation in the RNG chip, you could predict the result. Even a coin flip isn't truly random. It's determined by the throw's force, angle, and spin. Magicians have even demonstrated that with precise control, a flare coin can be forced to land on the chosen side. In that sense, randomness is often not a property of nature, but of our limited knowledge. Chaos theory is what bridges this gap. Some deterministic systems are so sensitive to the initial conditions that their long-term behavior becomes effectively unpredictable. The classic butterfly effect. The double pendulum is a perfect example of this. Release it twice with nearly the same identical starting angles, and you'll see completely different motions. Tiny differences explode into wild divergences. Mathematically, it's still deterministic, but practically, it feels random. Computers work much the same way. A RNG is a controlled form of chaos. Changes the initial seed by even 1 bit, and the entire output sequence changes completely. It's not true randomness, but it's chaotic enough that for us, it might as well be. Then there's quantum mechanics, which seems to break determinism altogether. At the smallest scales, nature behaves probabilistically. The exact moment when an atom decays, or how a photon passes through a beam splitter, is fundamentally unpredictable. Einstein famously objected, saying, "God does not play dice with the universe." Niels Bohr's reply was equally famous: "Stop telling God what to do with his dice." This quantum behavior suggests that randomness isn't just a human illusion. It's woven into the fabric of reality itself. Modern hardware RNGs even exploit this. They use predictable noise in semiconductors or in quantum effects like tunneling and photon detection to produce truly random bits. In that sense, our machines can now reach into the universe's own randomness. Yet, even if randomness is real, humans have a hard time accepting it. Randomness means a lack of control, and psychologically, that's uncomfortable. So we invent rituals to feel in charge, blowing on dice, carrying lucky charms, timing button presses. Gamblers show this vividly. People feel more confident when they throw the dice themselves, and they even throw harder when they want higher numbers, and softer for lower ones, as if the effort can influence the chance. Lottery players often insist on picking their own numbers rather than using a quick pick, because choosing creates an illusion of control. This illusion can be both comforting and dangerous. It can reduce anxiety, but can also feed problem gambling. When people believe they have influence over random outcomes, they tend to keep playing, convinced that their persistence or strategy will eventually pay off. Studies show that even when a task is clearly chance-based, participants given the illusion of choice report feeling in more control than those who aren't. Combined with variable reinforcement, occasional wins, and an unpredictable pattern, this belief can spiral into addiction. Psychologist Mark Griffiths notes that many gamblers develop faulty beliefs about randomness, such as thinking slot machines have memories, that luck evens out over time. Correcting those beliefs is often key to recovery. Luck itself is a human construct, randomness viewed through a personal lens. When good things happen by chance, we call it luck. When bad things happen, misfortune. Gamers even joke about RNG Jesus, the imaginary god of random number generators, as if good drops or rare pulls were divine blessings. Deep down, we know it's code, not magic, but emotionally we still respond the same as if some mysterious force is at work. This tendency mirrors ancient thinking. When early humans didn't understand weather or disease, they attributed them to gods. When outcomes are unpredictable and beyond our control, we intrinsically seek meaning or agency. But the truth is that the RNG doesn't know you lost 5 times in a row. Each roll, spin, or pull is independent. Still, our brains rebel against that idea. True randomness looks streaky and unfair, so we convince ourselves there must be a hidden order. The illusion of randomness cuts both ways. We often see patterns where none exist, and we often fail to see randomness hiding beneath the apparent order. Computers, unlike us, can't be lucky. Their randomness is engineered, not mystical. But to us, the experience feels the same. A lucky roll, a rare item, a coin toss that goes our way. As psychologist Amos Tversky observed, we have a nasty habit of misperceiving randomness. The task, whether in gaming, science, or cryptography, is to make sure that the randomness is genuine when it matters, and to recognize our own biases when it isn't. In the end, randomness feels like magic, but in reality, it's math. Understanding that distinction doesn't make life less mysterious, but makes us less likely to be fooled by the illusion. It makes our games more fun to play. Thank you for watching this video. It took a lot of time to make, so please leave a like if you enjoyed it. Click on another video below if you want to see more. Alright, peace out. Have a good day.